Hey guys, and welcome to another installment of the PH Journals podcast. In past and recent episodes, we've touched on technology, we've touched on social media, but what does this really mean for the hunting industry and techniques that we utilize in the hunting industry? We touch base on this one in this week's episode of the podcast. So guys, an interesting topic this week. It's all about technology. It's all about utilizing technology in the hunting industry for benefits of the hunter. Now, is this ethical, non-ethical? Whatever your guys' opinions may be, I would love to hear it in the comments, whether it be on any one of the social media platforms, through Carbon TV or YouTube, wherever you've been watching this. But before we get into it, of course, this week's episode is sponsored by Falcon Tires. Now, guys, with that being said, I can't thank each and every single one of you enough for entering the Falcon Tire giveaway competition. Competition closes at the end of this month. We've got some incredible prizes to add to the set of tires, like handcrafted knives. We've got a bunch of leather products, from wallets, belts. The list just goes on and on and on. Probably one of the biggest giveaways PH Journals has ever done, which is pretty cool. But I wanted to give back to the professional hunting community, and what better way than setting them up for the upcoming season with a set of pretty awesome tires. I've seen these tires in action. I must say, I am fully aware of how incredible they really are, with 3-ply sidewalls, and the list goes on and on and on with all the beneficials, stone deflection and all that sort of stuff. We'll kit you out, no matter where you are in South Africa, we'll kit you out just in time for the upcoming season. With that being said, this week's episode is all about technology. Now, how this came about, I had a couple of interesting conversations with a bunch of friends of mine. Actually, it was how this all started was an individual reached out to me to allow me the opportunity to come and utilize thermal hunting at night for a culling expedition on some springbuck out in the Free State area. And there was a part of me that jumped to this opportunity, right? Not only because I could get a little bit trigger happy, but also because of utilizing different equipment. Now, part of being a hunter, as much as I want to experience different hunting cultures and scenarios out there from hunting in different countries and around the world, it makes sense to be able to utilize different techniques. Now, I've just done a review on a crossbow episode. I'm a compound bow hunter by heart. Of course, we hunt with rifles as well. So having different techniques of hunting out of a blind, tree stand, whatever it may be, is also pretty crucial to understanding what really goes on behind hunting and conservation. But there was also a part of me that kind of looked at the scenario and say, it kind of feels a little bit unfair. Now, it's difficult for me to comment on that particular scenario because I personally believe that how we combat conservation is by culling off certain species. So, for instance, in this case with the springbuck. So if the farmer believes he has got too many springbuck, we are well within our rights to be able to go along and manage that herd accordingly. However we may do it, however it may be seen, I always see if it gets to that point of management, any way, anyhow to take off the numbers is perceived as being ethical. That is my personal opinion. That is how I feel about the situation. Because like I've said in many, many podcasts prior, I've said hunting affords us the opportunity to manage a fake ecosystem that us as humans have created, and there's no particular group. We can't point fingers and say, okay, hunters are the cause of this overpopulation in the world, or land encroachment, or whatever the reason may be for us to be encroaching in on wildlife land. We can't point fingers. However, it is our responsibility as hunters, as human beings, to manage those ecosystems now, because we have to look after it to the best of our ability for future generations. So with that being said, what is deemed ethical? If you are a client coming out, is it something that you look into and you want to capitalize on every possible opportunity and utilize every possible piece of technology out there to make sure that you get your desired animals, you complete your bucket list, and you go home? Does it take away from the experience? There's so many questions that run around in my head, and I love having debates with people, because on one hand I might see a lot of negative, but on the other hand certain individuals might see a lot of positive. At the end of the day, we all want the same thing. Let's not muddy the waters here. We all want the same thing, right? We all want to preserve and conserve so that future generations can enjoy what we've enjoyed. But it boils down to ethics. It boils down, what is that line? Where does that line get drawn when it comes to ethics? And I've broken this down into a couple of different scenarios. So my first point of topic I would like to discuss is night vision and thermal optics. The first thing we need to highlight is that it definitely offers you a much needed, or not much needed, but an overwhelming advantage when it comes to hunting, especially at night. Now, for me, there are certain scenarios that this is very useful, and I'll be first one to admit that I have used thermals in the past on particular hunting scenarios. For instance, bush pig, jackal, lynx, calling them in, and that's to manage farmers' livestock, but it was also for clients. A client wanted a lynx, managed to call him in on a thermal, and I'll be the first one to admit as well, if it gets to that point of, for instance, jackal is a completely different scenario, because I think jackal is a species that will never be threatened as such as we speak. It might get to that point somewhere along the line, but right now I don't think so. For instance, a lynx, a caracal. Now for me, caracal they're majestic species of cat. I love a caracal. I think they're really, really unique. However, through the thermal scope, I couldn't sex that animal. So whether she had kittens or not, we did shoot a female. We ended up shooting a big female, a really, really big female. And it had a kill. It had a little lamb, as it killed a little lamb. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, yeah, but it's killing the livestock and all that sort of thing. If we're looking at it from a conservation point of view, we shouldn't just be shooting willy-nilly. Of course, if there's an issue, if there's overpopulation in that particular area, and there was over a stock farmer's land, and it's killing all the lambs, and the stock farmer is struggling to make a living out of it, and we paid him good money for that cat, then of course we're in well right. We're in our management territorial to understand that cat is perfectly fine to be able to take. However, if we look at it from a conservation point of view, if that animal was an endangered species and we needed to make a call whether this was an ethically old cat to take, it would have been very, very difficult to do so with thermals. Now, a lot of people might argue against experience and head size and all these sort of things. For me, on my personal experience, I found that to be particularly difficult. And I made a point of actually being able to try and do that. I really searched and I thought, well, if this is going to be an effective way of hunting, well, can I sex these animals? And it wasn't just the lynx. It boiled down to kudu. Kudu was a little bit different because we could see the bull in stature and everything like that. But on things, we passed the blazeback herd. And the blazeback herd, I mean, you would have to spend quite a bit of time to really identify the male out of that herd, especially with thermals. Now, there could have been 1,000 different scenarios on why I couldn't do that with the quality of thermal I was using and all that sort of stuff. In that moment, that's what I experienced. So, my personal opinion on thermal hunting, it's great for management. It has a place in the hunting industry for vermin, and that's where it stops. I have seen clients, professional hunters, outfitters utilize thermal to gain an advantage out in the bush on certain species. Bushback, kudu, nyala, just to name a few. Where this gets tricky for me is that if we are considering hunting as a sport, thermals in those scenarios is like doping. I just feel there's that line of ethical that we spoke about a little bit earlier. It kind of just crosses that line ever so slightly. People might disagree, might agree. The argument, we had a wonderful discussion about it, the argument of, but the clients coming out here, you know how it is with kudu hunting. It's time, it's effort. When it gets to day 7, you're up against the crunch. You got to make sure that you got to fill your packages and all this sort of thing. There's so many different arguments, and I'm just giving my personal opinion on this, because ultimately what this podcast is designed for, what PH Journals was intended for, was to have these hard conversations, put out solo episodes so that you guys can go back and around the campfire, around the lodge at the dining room table or something, have these conversations with one another, because it's good to learn. It's good to have different perspectives and understand, because at the end of the day, like I mentioned earlier, we all want the same thing, right? But if we're not going to initiate these conversations, or we're going to veer away from it, how are we ever going to know or better ourselves as an industry, or knowing where that line may be? I might feel like that, 50 other professional hunters might feel like that, but you might have 69 other professional hunters that feel completely differently. But we've all got to come to a collective and say, okay, but let's not call each other out on it and say, oh, that's frowned upon. But let's come to a collective and say, okay, but these scenarios we shouldn't be utilizing for the good of, number one, the species of animals that we are hunting, and number two, the client's experience. Because ultimately, I believe the professional hunting industry, the hunting industry, we need to start selling moments and experience and memories more than just a hunting trip. And that's important. My personal opinion. But again, thermal hunting can be used for so many benefits in managing this ecosystem that we have falsely created. So another one that was an interesting topic that came up was camouflage, and I released on the Professional Hunting Facebook group a couple of days ago about camo. Now, I love camo. I mean, as I sit here in my studio tonight, I've got 2 cupboards full of camouflage. I love it. I think it's really cool. I think it's unique. I think there's no other industry out there that offers such a unique item, or I want to say uniform, but it's not really uniform, but clothing out there that is designed for a specific purpose. Yes, of course, you can argue about safety boots and all that sort of stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about patterned clothing. It's designed to camouflage ourselves and give us the edge, or give us a little bit of a gain on the species we're hunting. Now there's military and all that we can argue, but in a nutshell, I'm talking about the hunting. And camo is an interesting topic because a lot of guys have said, but the technology in the camouflage has evolved and it's lost its purpose. And I don't think the intention for camo has always been there to completely hide what we are trying to do. So hide a hunt. But it's meant to be there purely for curiosity. I've seen a number of different species that are extremely curious about what's going on. What is that movement? And it allows for us to have that opportunity for animals to have that unique engagement because we're the predator and they the prey. So it's that unique interaction you've got where instinct prevails, right? So you essentially, if you imagine it as a lion stalking an impala, and the impala knows and it's seen movement in the grass and it's heard movement in the grass, but the inquisitiveness is still there, and the instinct is for flee, but it still wants to know if it's danger. And it allows us to have that interaction with the wildlife, I personally believe. Because if you look at it from a whole perspective, I don't think there's any perfect camouflage out there. I don't think there's a perfect garment that somebody can wear that can be completely hidden away. Yes, there's some brilliant camouflage out there that hide you in the bush, and I've seen guys recently on a turkey trip. You couldn't even see they were there. The only thing that gave them away was the yellow string of their bow lying in the grass, and I thought that was pretty cool. But as far as technology goes from hunting and the evolution of camo, I don't think there's much there. However, evolution of clothing, more breathable, lightweight, more durable out in the bush, compared to on the PH group, one of the guys says he still hunts in his blue overalls, which I love that. I love that because it's such a traditional, such a unique and old school way of hunting. I really dig it. But I mean, I can't imagine anything worse than crawling around in the South Africa bushveld in a blue overall, dripping with sweat because it's full on cotton, zips, those hard, intense metal zips, scratching you all over and stuff. So I just think there's a lot more easier gear out there than to put yourself through a bit of a strenuous battle over there. I'm going to save this point for last. The next one was smart optics, drones, and what are the regulations? So let's chat about drones first, because I think it's the least utilized form of hunting out there. I've got a drone. I'd never touch it on a hunting trip unless I've got to film hunting stuff. But even then, I would never be physically hunting. So a lot of the shots that you see with a drone, I'll never be physically hunting an animal, because I just believe that if you're going to start chasing animals or utilizing a drone for an advantage, that it way exceeds that line. I just don't think there's a place for it in the hunting industry. A lot of people might disagree with me, and again, it just boils down to what is your argument. And if we can agree to disagree on a certain point, especially a technique, well then sure, by all means. But I personally don't believe that drones have any sort of discussion as far as ethical hunting techniques. I don't see it. I could be wrong. I hope there are individuals out there that have utilized them in certain scenarios. I never have even tried, but I hope there are individuals out there that have utilized them in certain different scenarios, and then maybe they can give me some feedback in the comments or whatever it may be. I know a couple of years ago, I vaguely remember somebody utilizing a drone to try and find a wounded animal, which is fine. I've seen guys use helicopters, especially on like big animals such as Cape buffalo and stuff like that. You really don't want to lose that expensive animal. So again, it boils down to that conversation, right, about ethical reaction. And I like to keep it more traditional. I've utilized helicopters to try and find a wounded buffalo in the past. I've seen it happen many times at the client's expense. And it's not ideal, because you always want to trust in your ability and trust in your tracker's ability to be able to find that animal. But I do understand time is a factor, and if the facilities are there, why not? Especially on a wounded animal. No one wants to see an animal suffer, especially on a Cape buffalo that can go for a couple of days with a bullet in it. So that's the last thing you ever want. So I mean, there's always, like I said, there's that discussion. It hovers on the fence there of that line. But drones, I don't think it has a conversation. AI and smart optics. Now, this was an interesting one for me. There's a couple of I've been doing a little bit of research on AI in the hunting industry and how we can utilize it to our benefit. Now, AI, there's a couple of optic companies that are actually utilizing AI. I know it's been currently experimented in the US Defense Force. Russia's also utilizing it. I think they've just recently utilized it in the missile attacks in Ukraine. Please don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure about it. I've just been watching YouTube episodes about it. But AI essentially can navigate or understand the pattern of your optic behavior. So whether you got a rangefinder or binoculars that's linked to your scope, which there are a number of them out there, it can pick up certain different patterns, elevation, wind direction, and those sort of things through technologies utilized, and then be able to give you the best possible scenario when to pull the trigger. Now, this is an interesting one, because I personally believe it's not ethical. And the reason why I say that is it takes out that intimate reaction, or that intimate ability to engage with animals from an instinct point of view. Like I mentioned with the camo, you want to feel engaged. You want to feel that back and forth, that chess game of instincts versus technique versus art, because it's a bit of a dance through the bush that you're putting on in order to get as close as possible as you can to your prey, and then making full advantage of it. So for me, if we're looking at it from that line perspective, I think in certain scenarios, on certain species, I know I would use it on frustrating animals, like a fall rheabuck, for instance, where you know that distance, it's going to be a distant shot. That might just benefit you a little bit on making sure that that shot is as ethical as it possibly can. But again, you don't want to take away from your ability. You don't want to take away from your opportunity to engage in that dance between yourself and the animal. And that's a crucial one. But again, like I said, it opens for that unique conversation to have with friends, fellow PHs, clients. Like, what do you guys feel about this? Because I don't think there's a right and a wrong in this scenario. I don't. I think any way you look at it, you can argue the fact that it's an ethical way of hunting. But again, you can argue the fact that it's not ethical, and it's a great conversation point. So for me, AR, smart optics, I believe it takes away from the primal factor, it takes away from the instinct, it takes away from the dance, the experience of the stalk. And to round it all off, which will lead me into the next discussion point, is long range shooting. Now, long range shooting, I did a podcast on this and I watched it today. Let me turn this aircon off. I watched it today. And I went back and I was like, I made some really good points on why I don't think this is ethical. But I've learned so much since that episode, and I understand so much. I really do. And I'm going to use the fellow deer hunt last year as an example. Myself and Rusty, we put in a lot of hard work for 2 days straight. I had a 60-yard shot that I missed. I had a 45-yard shot that I wasn't in the correct position to pull off. And I landed shooting my fellow deer at 23 yards. And what is my point behind this? Well, I've done so much work in making sure that my 60-yard shot is pinpoint accurate, from upgrading my sight, upgrading my arrows, making sure that my bow is shooting at X amount of feet per second, and just making sure that I'm bang on, practicing on a day in, day out basis. So my 60-yard shot, I was more than confident about. My argument on my previous episode about this topic was I didn't feel that there was any art to long distance shooting. And my perspective's completely changed. And why has it changed? Well, I've seen what hunters go through in making sure that their rifle is adequately equipped to be able to take those long distance shots. So if you are shooting at 650 yards, there's so much science, work, and practice that goes into that, to making sure that you're pulling that trigger, that it's an ethical shot. Because let's face facts, the further the animal is away from you, the less chance of it becoming an ethical, deadly shot. Because ultimately, as a hunter, first prize is as quick of a death as possible. So why the sudden change? Why? Yeah, on the last point with the AR and the smart optics, I was saying, but we're missing out on that opportunity. But the work is getting done for you. On long range shooting, the hunter has done the work, so much so before the hunt, intensely, that when it comes down to the trigger part, there's still so much work. There's still so much science and consideration there is to take into place. The wind direction, the weight of the bullet, and all these sort of things that come into play. The drop, the temperature, the atmospheric pressure. There's so much. And that only comes together perfectly with understanding of your rifle, of your load, of your bullet, of your scope. What are the capabilities of your setup? So I've changed my perception on long range shooting. I think there is an argument for it to be ethical, and I think there's an argument where it might just cross that ethical line. But so much so, it also affords you the opportunity with the correct optics to be able to now pick and choose the most ethical bull to take. Because often in close quarter hunting, you're pressured into a very difficult position where you might not be able to see the oldest bull out of the herd, or the oldest ram out of the herd, or an old dugger boy hiding around the corner. From distance, you get to see the bigger picture. So that also comes into conversation. And in my personal opinion, if we had to close it off on a particular point, is long-range shooting and ballistic technology ethical? My personal opinion will be yes. And I know there's a conversation for it. And I hope it gets had. I hope it does. So, all in all, what can I summarize from this episode? Guys, technology is there for us to benefit, for the wildlife to benefit. It's there for us to help make ethical decisions and have ethical conversations, because that's what we ultimately need. We've got to keep ourselves understanding. As professional hunters, I always say, if you're not arguing with your fellow hunter, you've lost the passion for it. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we need to keep each other honest about the situations. So if you believe that long-range shooting is not ethical, why? Let's take all factors into consideration. Because ultimately, we want to make the industry better. We want to make sure that it gets seen through the same glass, the ethical glass. Because with such a controversial industry, we are fighting against ourselves and many, many people out there on all the same thing. We just want to look after our wildlife. But there's so many cool and different ways to do so. Yeah. I'm waffling on you. But if you guys have got a different perception or perspective on ethical hunting, technology, please guys, share it with me. Let's have the conversation. Let's open it up to the floor, because I think conversation is so important. Like always, if you guys haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and if you enjoyed this episode, drop me a thumbs up, or if you want to see me discuss any other topic, well, then drop it in the comments. But guys, I can't thank you guys enough for the incredible amount of support. It really means the world to me. And don't forget about the wonderful competition with the Falcon tires. If you haven't yet, head along to Instagram or anyone on the social media platforms, go and enter the competition, or contact a professional hunter that you might think needs a set of tires. There are going to be T's and C's when the winner is announced. So please just make sure that you are a registered professional hunter in South Africa. And head along to any of those socials and find out a little bit more. Enter into the competition. What do you have to lose? Cost you nothing. Very simple to enter. And you could be the lucky one walking away with a set of tires or some really cool handcrafted leather and knives. So, for myself, if you are, happy hunting. Until then, stay safe, stay blessed, and stay humble. We'll catch up with you guys soon.